and I've been doing this for 23 years. I still pick up my players at the airport when they arrive for training. I still pack up the training camp gifts when they come into the office and help the interns with that sort of stuff. I think, once you lose that, you lose the culture of this place. And I think one of the great things has been how everybody's willing to pitch in and do their part, and actually do more than their part.
Welcome back to the next episode of the Athletes First Family Podcast, focusing on our quarterback series. I am Brian Murphy, CEO of Athletes First, and this is my trusted co-host, AJ Stevens, who is a VP of Client Strategy, perhaps the best contract negotiator in our business.
Thanks, Murph. The purpose of this podcast is to give an insider's view into the largest and most successful football agency in the industry. This series is specifically focused on A1's quarterback expertise. Why we think we're here to talk about that is because Athletes First currently has $1.4 billion of active NFL contracts for quarterbacks on the books. This is the most for any agency in the industry, and the history of A1's quarterback representation includes a dozen record-breaking contracts.
This episode, we welcome my close friend, Athletes First equity partner, Justin Schulman, to our show. Welcome,
Murph,
Justin.
how are you?
Doing well.
AJ?
Doing well.
See ya.
It's going to be a great show. We're going to talk about Justin's journey from a very heartfelt letter he wrote to Athletes First, I believe, in 2002. And then we're going to follow his career, during which time he not only became a super agent who's done a number of record-breaking deals, including a huge quarterback deal for Justin Herbert, but he also has been our de facto CFO, COO, head of charity, and have worn many, many different hats during our 2 decades together. So a great story. I can say that Justin is the only super agent in the industry who also functions as a CFO, also functions as CEO in the history of our industry. So it's a great story, and I appreciate your time today, Justin. I know it's a busy season. Let's just jump right into your background. Let's talk about the kind of poor school you went to, and then go from there.
Sure. So went to the University of Michigan, obviously go blue. Big thing for there with me was they had a sport management program, and I always knew from kind of the age of 16 or so I wanted to work in sports. So that's why I went to Michigan. I was fortunate. I landed after my time in Michigan. I landed at the NBA league office. Spent about a year in their management training program. Got rotated around. Shoot, this is now almost 30 years ago.
The National Basketball Association.
In the National Basketball Association, their league office. My third of 4 rotations was with the WNBA, actually, before it launched. The last day of my rotation was the day before the league had its first game.
Wow. And
And then I got pulled from the rotational program, placed permanently in the WNBA, was the 8th or 9th employee there. Spent 3 seasons there. Didn't know much about women's basketball, but got to be there on the ground working with Val Ackerman, who was then the commissioner of the league. She's now the head of the Big East, I believe, and did that for 3 seasons. Great experience. Decided I wanted to go get a graduate degree. Got a MBA degree over at UCLA, which was home for me. Had a sports and entertainment bent to it, which was exciting. And then it was time to find a job. And
Well, before you get into that, let's just let's look at something I said. So you were in high school, and you knew you wanted to be in the sports industry.
yeah, I was an athlete in high school. I was a good baseball player, but I always realized I was going to be 5'8" and slow. Doesn't really add up to much. So for me, it was, my dad actually 3 important life lessons. I should give him the credit. He said, work wherever your passion is. Make sure when you wake up in the morning, you love what you do. That was number 1. 2, it was find a way to work for yourself and kind of be your own boss. So that way, if you want to go coach your kids in Little League or flag football or whatnot, you can go do that. And then his other, ironically, was return every email, call, or text. But for that's why I ended up at Michigan, was go pursue sports.
No, it's great. And it was, did you want to be an agent, or you just want to be in sports?
It's funny. I had zero interest in being an agent. When I worked at the NBA, I saw and I dealt with the players a lot. And when I left to go to business school, everyone's like, go be an agent. I was like, I don't want to be a babysitter. And that's how I saw the business. NBA players are definitely different than NFL players. Fewer of them, and with AAU basketball, a lot of things are different. But I did not want to be an agent. In fact, when I sent my email here to you and Dave and Joby Branyan, it wasn't to pitch myself as an agent at all. You know, it was kind of a byproduct of everything.
So let's talk about that. So you had a great experience at MBA.
Yep.
Very hard to get into that program, but
Yep.
you must have done well at Michigan. And then helped launch the WNBA, which is obviously much different today than it was 2001.
Absolutely. Back then, I mean, complete startup, right? And it was David Stern's vision, and he wasn't going to let it fail.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience for a 23-year-old to get it on the ground floor and to get to do so much there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, great experience there. Met a lot of people. Came back to LA where you grew up.
Right.
What was your nickname playing sports?
Scoop.
Scoop. Phenomenal shortstop, is that it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then we won't talk about any more about your.
Appreciate you.
And then so then you go to Anderson School of Business, amazing place, get a degree, and it's time to find a job.
Yeah.
And so you talk about how did you get to Athletes First?
So the biggest struggle actually was right after graduation. So I only wanted to work in sports, and I only wanted to work in California. I had a bunch of opportunities to go with what's now the G League, was the NBDL, which was just launching through the NBA. But I only wanted to be here in Southern California, and unfortunately, you know, terribly, right after graduation, 9/11 happened. So the entire market shut down. So I was biding my time doing some consulting work on the side. And I read an article in ESPN, the magazine, about Athletes First, which had just launched in 2001. So I was, you know, I think the article came out maybe at the end of 2001, beginning of 2002. And I just sent an email to you, Dave, and Joby, the founding partners. And I remember specifically the title of the email was, "I want to help," or the first line of the email was, "I want to help." And I had startup experience with the WNBA. I was comfortable with numbers and had done a bunch of other things. And I remember pitching you on kind of like almost a business development role, looking to go beyond representation and find ways to help the business grow.
Well, and I want to paint this picture because I think where Athletes First is now is quite different than it was 2001.
Sure.
Right? And in terms of my background, I was a psychology major.
Yep.
I went to law school, went to Harvard Law School, and became a litigator. I didn't know what EBITDA meant. I didn't know how to run a company. I didn't know anything about it. You know, I moved out to California to be a sports agent and then started Athletes First in 2001. So when we got your letter, like business development, I don't even know what business development is, right? And, you know, you said you wanted to help. We're like, whoa, this guy worked at the NBA, you know, went to Michigan, has an MBA, like he can pay our bills. I mean, he can do something. So you came in and we only had like 3 or 4 employees, but what was the project that you were given at the
Well,
time?
it's actually funny. I'll take a step back there. AJ, you probably don't even know this, but you had somebody say, come down, and I was living in LA at the time. So I came down to meet with you guys, and I'm sitting in the room waiting to meet Murph. And I'm looking around and everybody's wearing sweatpants or whatnot. This guy's walking around with a hat backwards. I'm like, that's awesome. They let their interns wear, like, it was Murph wearing his hat backwards and sweatpants. But, you know, and then they kept me there for 7 hours with no food, no water, no nothing.
And you were in a full suit.
I think I was dressed nicely. I don't know if it was a full suit, but yes.
You have not dressed that nicely in the last 2 decades.
I appreciate that.
You set the tone early.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And, you know, it's funny. I interviewed with them and then kind of didn't hear anything for a while, and was interviewing elsewhere. And then out of the blue, Murph calls and he's like, "Hey, are you good with numbers?" And I'm like, "Do you remember my resume, anything?" And he's like, "Hey, I've got a project for you." And the project Murph gave me was the company was about to buy a $30,000, I think it was, phone system. And he was like, "Can you see and do some research and find out if this is the right purchase for us?" And I spent about a week with them and first off told them no, it wasn't, and found them a better solution for $5,000. But that was kind of the first project you gave me. And then it was, here you go, you're in charge of payroll, benefits, and everything else in our bank accounts.
Yeah, no, I mean, the big thing was that Justin knew how to use Excel, and Dave
right.
and I had no idea. So
The little things.
Do you know how to use Excel at this point?
I can use Excel. I'm still not great at paying bills.
He
But,
still doesn't know what EBITDA is, so we're good.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, I mean, it was a totally different time there. I mean, it was 24 years ago. We were so happy to get the help. We didn't know if we could afford the help either, because at the time, we were still looking for funding for the company. So we didn't have funding at the time. And you and I went on a bunch of meetings looking for funding. Remember that?
Yep.
That was quite the adventure.
Different times for sure.
Yeah. But eventually, you know, we hired Justin full time. What number employee were you?
I was probably like 8 or 9, but I think I was the first one that had zero connection
Right.
to the company. You know, Murph had hired his good college friend as our general counsel. I think you had brought in Drew Bledsoe's sister-in-law.
Yep. Sister-in-law. Yep.
But other
Courtney.
than that, everybody else, like the other 5 people, had come from the other spot. So I was the first one, and within a week, they're like, "Here's our bank account information, and here's our payroll, and go ahead and run with it."
I don't know where our money's been for 2 decades.
That's funny. Neither do I.
Yeah.
So we're good.
That's great. So let's talk about that a little bit, because, what we're going to talk about in the next podcast is, the Justin Herbert deal. And obviously, eventually you became certified. We'll get into all that. But
Sure.
very unique. I don't think there's anyone else in our industry who can say that they were both a super agent and like let's start with the CFO. I mean, like paying the bills, sending out billing, like telling us how much money we had. Like, did you expect that? Did you want that? And
It's a good question. It's funny because you and I talk about, like, I wasn't qualified to be a CFO. I just happened to be good with numbers and had a basic understanding of finance. But when I joined, I had zero, again, interest in being an agent. And then I remember you guys, April of 2023. So I'd been there for about 6-7 months, and it was Carson Palmer's
2003, not
2003. It's Carson Palmer's contract. And I remember you guys pulled me into that, and we're working through net present value and stuff in the little war room. And I remember, so I was involved in that deal and involved in a couple of other free agent deals. And I think it was like 2004 or so. You're like, "Hey, we need you to go get certified." And I was like, "This is not what I wanted. This isn't what I signed up for." But I ended up doing it and started recruiting there. And yeah, it's been great. I love.
Well, stick to the CFO part. Like, let's stick to the CFO part for a
Sure.
second. Like, so you did that for a long time.
I did that for a really long time through a bankruptcy and through everything. I did that and watched us grow and tried to put, as I called it, a tent on our circus. And it was, as you can attest, not easy, especially as we're growing.
We also did a number of transactions, right? And we went down the road a long way with Wasserman at one point.
That's right.
Maybe think about selling to them. We sold a third of a company, Dentsu, in Japan. Right. And then, last couple of years, we did our most recent deal. We sold 51% of the company. But that was all me, you, and the general counsel just figuring it out.
100%. It was trial by fire. And I remember, in the Wasserman transaction, it was completely new to us, right? I think we had a lawyer guide us for a little bit, but for us, it was pretty much on our own. And then similar through Dentsu, and then definitely with the most recent transaction. But I think a lot of it was just, hey, we'll figure it out.
Right.
And, and I think we've gotten to a point where it's like, okay, we can't stop figuring it out.
Yep.
Let's get someone who's actually done this.
Yep. And now what about that? But then you're also the CEO in a way. I mean,
sure.
Running, so talk about like the training program. I mean, how you kind of took that and ran with it. And
yeah, because when I started, you guys had, I think, trained in Florida for a year or something like that.
Yeah, Disney World,
right? Or IMG,
Animal Kingdom.
Yeah, or something.
No, Disney World, Animal Kingdom, and Wild Wilderness Sports.
Awesome. And
buffet every day, put on 24 pounds.
It was amazing. You guys did that and paid for a whole Super Bowl party for $252,000 or something like that. Shocking.
That was pre you. You changed everything.
Pre me. So we talked about training, and there was definitely options to do it at a place where they do it for you.
Yeah.
But I think you and I looked at it and said it's too cookie cutter. Let's do our own situation. And yeah, you didn't want to go back to the buffet, so we found Soka University.
Yeah.
I think was our first place, and a trainer named Chuck Williams, and it kind of grew from there. And we did it there, and then we went over to Velocity and formed a partnership with them. And I just remember doing research on all these different places and trying to figure out, hey, listen, it's more cost effective, but it won't be done the athlete's first way.
Yep.
And then the question just becomes, how can we do it ourselves and make it better and better and better? And we did. And I think, we built something that's completely unique with our academy, in that, I think we were the first agency to do it and have their own spot. I think there's maybe one or two that have tried to follow suit. But, the results have been fantastic, and we're excited about what's to come with that.
Yeah. No, I remember you traveling all over the country looking for the best place and coming back saying, we need to build the best place. We need to create the best place and have it be the Athlete's First Academy and go from there. Another project you worked on as CEO, which I think was disruptive, very unique. No one's still done it, but you and I started the Athlete's First Classic together. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. And in fact, it's funny. I still have the presentation I made to you when I was kind of trying to create a job. And one of them was, let's do a charity golf tournament. Oh. And, Yeah, so that was 2004.
Yep.
For junior achievement, benefiting junior achievement. I remember you and I, we sent out the invitations probably 8 weeks before the event, but we sent out invitations and we're trying to sell it. And I think you and I looked at each other and we're like, oh shit, like here we go.
Yep.
And I remember we partnered up with Noah McMahon and his company, and at the time was McMahon Marketing, and the three of us and Jessica Hudson from our office, all of a sudden we're planning a wedding for 600 people.
Yep.
In addition to everything else we're doing.
Yep.
But for us, it was, hey, we always tell our players to give back and to do good. Well, why aren't we doing the same thing? So we started that, and at I think the first year was pretty good. And then it grew from there, and we supported Orangewood for 15 years or so, and has continued to grow and prosper, and has raised probably 10 million plus for the charities that we worked with. So yeah, pretty cool experience. And I think, again, something that makes Athletes First unique. I think others do smaller charity events, but no one's done it with our scale.
No, now it's become a whole weekend, and now we're working with Axe ALS, and probably done about 20 years. And I'd say far north of 10 million, but also like it is a great way to get all of our clients together and our network together and brands together and our company together, employees together as well.
I will say I do not miss the week of you and I doing seating charts for 600 people.
Yeah.
That was definitely something that was good to pass on.
And I think that's an interesting point to make, right? Because when you came on, you said you were the 8th employee. Now we have 85 employees.
Right.
We were a mom and pop, and we prided ourselves on being a mom and pop. But talk a little bit about what that means to be a mom and pop, like you and I doing seating charts, stuff like that.
Absolutely. I think, it was the jack of all trades. It literally was do whatever you can, roll up your sleeves. And candidly, that's one, how I was raised, and two, I don't think I've changed. I mean, I've been doing this for 23 years. I still pick up my players at the airport when they arrive for training. I still pack up the training camp gifts when they come into the office and help the interns with that sort of stuff. I think, once you lose that, you lose the culture of this place. And I think one of the great things has been how everybody's willing to pitch in and do their part, and actually do more than their part.
And do you think like coming from an outsider, or like starting at the beginning of mom and pop, like, because we've done a lot of things, you've initiated a lot of things that no other agency's done and they don't do now. Like, is that because you had an outsider's perspective? Is because you didn't grow up you just grew up at Athletes First, but you hadn't interned anywhere else or anything?
Yeah, I think it's also, listen, I've learned from you, like, you continuously want to evolve, right? And you continuously want to get better. And you push me in that sense, right? Sometimes I'm the, hey, let's take a breath and figure out what we're doing. And you continuously want to push. I think growing up in this place, you build a pride that's unlike any other. And what's interesting is, yeah, we have 86 employees, but the vast majority, I would say, this is their first job.
Yep.
And that's a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing. I remember when I got here and started with like, hey, we're going to fill out expense report this way because this is how I saw it at the MBA. And everyone was like, no. Like, what are you doing? We don't do stuff like that. I'm like, no, we're going to do stuff like that. And I think that, that's one of the struggles of going from a small startup to now a mid-sized company is, as I referenced before, trying to put the tent on the circus and add some structure and do those things. But as long as you do them, and then, everybody understands that you're doing it for a reason, I think it kind of benefits everybody. We
talked a little bit about better together and that philosophy. I mean, I think like when we were growing up and building this business together, we had to do everything, and you had to do it together. Because we had 5, 6, 10, 12 people competing against agencies that had 100 people, and we weren't working together. It wasn't going to get done.
Well, not to mention, I mean, remember, go back to that time, we were facing a judgment of $44 million. We were in bankruptcy while we appealed a judgment that was unfairly, put upon us. So like, yeah, it was fight and scrap.
Yeah.
And I think that it's something that, defined who we were then. If you look back at the competition in the agency business back then, most of those people are gone.
Yep.
Either they've been eaten up into other mergers or they've switched. I mean, that's one of the things I talk to people about our firm. If you look at our senior management, you look at our senior agents, nobody's left. Like, no, people, like, it's very rare in our business to have employees who have been here for 20 plus years in the same place. So you look at yourself, you look at me, you look at Ryan Williams, you look David Mulgeta starting as an intern here. Carmen Wallace has been here the entire time. Like, people haven't left. Kyle McCarthy was a player client of ours. nobody's left. And I think that's a real tribute to what we built.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. So let's talk a little bit about our relationship. 'Cause I think it's unique,
Oh,
right?
God.
Like, how would you? We've been working together for 23 years, whatnot, and we do everything together. Like, how would you describe our relationship?
It's the reason I'm bald, large, and no, it's listen, I think you and I have been a perfect foil to one another in that you're the big visionary, you're the always positive, and I'm probably the more detail focused and more realistic of the two.
You can say pessimistic.
Okay. Everybody calls me pessimistic, but it's like I actually like the word realistic. But no, I mean, we've worked well together. I think you have your visions of how you want things to go, and then but you are open to kind of seeing the other side of things. And then I've obviously had to adjust how I work to kind of make what you want come to fruition, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, and I think we look at the world very differently, but I would say without question, we're not doing this podcast. Athletes First doesn't have all these great accolades. If you hadn't come on board, if you hadn't written that letter, if you hadn't taken on the role of COO, if you hadn't taken the role of CFO, and if you hadn't been one of the few people, along with Humes, who stand up to me and say, no, that's too far. We can't do that.
That's why I was here, Murph.
Yeah. So I think that's great. But also you've been a huge help in terms of being an agent, and dive into that part of your career. Kind of talk about a little bit, like, so what you were helping us on the Carson Palmer deal.
Yeah, helping on that and helping on, I think, a couple of the free agent deals around that time. I think it was like Todd Heap, Ray Lewis, that sort of stuff. And you and had come to me, I think, and a couple of others and said, hey, go get licensed. And I went through that process and had my first draft class in 2005. So 20 years ago. And I've loved that part of my job. I've worked with probably anywhere from at a time. When I started, it was 10 guys on rosters. Now it's, 23, 24 guys. And it's great. Like, I do love that part of my job. I think it's changed. The business has changed dramatically, and we can always get into that. But working with the guys and helping the guys and guiding them through their careers has been something I truly love.
And no pun intended by this, but who was your first big client?
First client, Brandon Jacobs. So you're right about big, 6'4", 252 pounds or something, like 260-pound running back. One of the largest men I'd ever seen. And what's crazy about it is the first time I laid eyes on him was when he came to train. You think about how the business is now with recruiting and whatnot.
Right.
I remember waiting for him at John Wayne Airport, and I see this guy coming down the escalator, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a running back.
So in the recruitment process, you had never met him?
No, it was all via text message, phone calls. I did go meet his father-in-law, helped him with the process. I did go there to Hilton Head, South Carolina, and met with him. But other than that, it was all phone calls and text messages.
Which is so much different than today when you're seeing people 10, 15, 20 times before they ever sign.
Absolutely.
And Zoom. You had Zoom back then. You didn't have Zoom back then.
Right.
But who was Brandon?
So Brandon was a running back. He was a big-time high school running back out of Napoleonville, Louisiana, who went to Auburn and was the third member of a unbelievable running back room, which had Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown, which I think two top 5 running backs, right, in the 2005 draft. And Brandon ended up transferring to Southern Illinois, so that he was able to get on the field, and had a good year in Southern Illinois, was invited to the Shrine Game. I remember the Senior Bowl didn't want him because they didn't think he was a running back. And Brandon ended up drafted in the 4th round by the New York Giants. A number of teams had tried to make him a tight end, and were considering that in the draft process. Giants drafted him, and he won 2 Super Bowls. I think he either had or still has the most touchdowns in franchise history or something, like rushing touchdowns. I don't remember, but he had a great career with the Giants, beloved in New York. And I think the stat at the time was there were taller running backs and there were heavier running backs, but the combination, he was the largest in terms of the both.
He has a son right now who's a pretty good player?
Yeah, his son, and again, making me feel old, his son is graduating. He's a 6'7", 330-pound offensive lineman at 18 years old, going to Clemson. I think he had 30, 40 offers. So yeah, as I told Brandon, I think my career will start with Brandon and end with Braden. But no, it's pretty cool to see that.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about Justin Herbert in the next episode, but you also represented a number of other quarterbacks who you became very close to.
Sure. I was very, very fortunate to work with guys like Chad Henne, who came from my alma mater. So obviously that was really, really special. Worked with Chad Henne, worked with John Beck, another second rounder, who's a phenomenal quarterback trainer now. Was close with Kellen Clemens when he was in the league. And then Nick Foles obviously was another quarterback that I worked with.
Yep. And how has that been, that experience with all of them? Different, right?
It's completely different. And, I was saying to somebody else the other day, when you watch your client who's a quarterback play, you get a little bit nervous. No matter how long you've been doing it, you just get nervous. Even with a guy like Justin, as talented as he is, when you watch him drop back and pass, you're like, you just hope it all goes well.
You watch the games differently, for sure.
Completely differently.
I remember when Tom Brady went down and Matt Castle came in, I think I was at a restaurant watching the game. I raced home. I got to watch this by myself.
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen. Went pretty well, and then, you have a very unique ability. Some people would call it luck. Some people call it skill, but of signing mid-round players who go on to be the best at their position. You kind of tell us about a couple of them.
Yeah. Again, I luck definitely plays into it, but you look at some players and the draft, I always tell recruits the draft is wrong more than it's right. I think when you look at it just in terms of, there's plenty of guys who are drafted in the third, fourth round that make a ton of money, and guys in the first round who don't get out of their first contract.
Yep.
I've been fortunate to have some of those mid-round picks. Brandon was a fourth-round pick, played for a long time as a running back. Mark Andrews was a third-round pick. Arguably one of the top tight ends. Fred Warner was a third-round pick, best linebacker in the league right now. And there have been a handful. I was fortunate. Nick Foles was a third-round pick.
There's a wide receiver in LA.
I was just about to say Puka Nacua. See, Puka Nacua is another perfect example where, again, you think they're good players. Did I think Fred Warner would become the best linebacker in the league? No. And I love Fred, and he is the best at what he does, and he's on the path to a gold jacket, but he was kind of out of position in college. And then you look at a guy like Nick, going back to quarterbacks, so much of it for a quarterback is not just where you're drafted, but the situation that you're in.
Yep.
And I know you've seen this as well with guys, but you look at a guy like John Beck, 40th pick overall, second round, was drafted to a really bad team. And, their intent was not to play him. And I think they were 0-8, and finally they're like, let's just see what we have with him. And then he played, they went 1-15. They fire the head coach, they fire the GM who drafted him, and then ironically draft Chad Henne.
Yep.
But it's like John gets labeled, because of that performance. And, it's interesting because we're talking quarterbacks. That position has just so much scrutiny where, you'd rather be drafted later into a good situation.
Yep.
Right? Like Nick, his Super Bowl runs, he had great teams around him. And Nick played really well in the Super Bowl run and the playoff run. But, look what happened to Nick in St. Louis, right? When he doesn't have as good of a situation. So,
and you have a couple of young guys now that we're excited about too, right?
Yeah, in terms of quarterback.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was fortunate to work with Jake Haener, who was drafted by the New Orleans Saints, and Tanner McKee, who was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. Tanner's an interesting one because when he came out of high school, it was him, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields were the top three. And then Tanner went on a Mormon mission for 2 years. And Tanner chose the non-traditional football school. He chose Stanford, whereas Trevor went to Clemson and Justin went to Georgia and then to Ohio State. And, candidly, Stanford was not good.
Yeah.
And it affected Tanner's play to the point where, from a draft perspective, he was not highly sought after because the film was so bad.
Yep.
But kudos to, Howie Roseman. He's a 6th-round pick who's made the roster for 2 years.
Yep.
And I know they're excited about him.
Great future. So we're going to jump in a little. That's your recruiting, but, we're here to talk about contracts. So, AJ, you want to summarize some of Justin's highlights since he doesn't like to really talk about himself?
Yeah, no, we definitely want to get into some deals on this episode, and Justin's got a bunch of them we can talk about. One specifically, and we've talked about him a little bit already, is Nick Foles, and he had an extremely unique career path from where he started, where he bounced around to. There were talks that at one point he was going to consider retirement, and then he ends up at the pinnacle of the entire sport. Yeah. So just any insight on that, because I wasn't here yet, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, Nick was an interesting one because obviously he got drafted by Howie Roseman and Andy Reid, and Doug Peterson was the offensive coordinator at the time in Philadelphia. Played a little bit, and then Andy was let go, and they cleared house and brought in Chip Kelly. And there were concerns about how Nick would work in that system. And actually, if you remember and you go back, he was phenomenal in that system, made a Pro Bowl in that system. But for whatever reason, Andy decided he was not going to be, or not Andy, Chip decided he wasn't going to be the future. So traded him to St. Louis, I think, right around free agency, if I'm correct. And, suffice to say, it just didn't work. It was a disaster. I think it was St. Louis's last year in St. Louis. And just the whole situation was not good. And Nick completely, candidly lost the love of the game. It was really hard on him emotionally, spiritually. He's a very spiritual person. He just struggled with it and was pretty much done with football. You said he was considering retirement. I'm pretty sure he was retired. He was done. And I remember talking to him a lot about, is this how you want to end your career? How do you want to walk away? And he was just so spent. I think his story's been told that he was done, and then he decided to reconsider and come back. And Nick and I joke, he's found a way to ruin multiple family vacations. That one was, he called while we were in the Bahamas at Atlantis and said, I want to play, and I only want to play for one team. And I spent the rest of the vacation in the business center and on the floor of our bathroom at nights working on a contract with the Kansas City Chiefs. And then obviously for him to come back, he found the love again in 1 year. And then Howie,
in Kansas City, he chose because of
Andy Reid.
Andy.
And it was the comfort. Good point. If anybody was going to help him find the love again, it was Andy. And he did. So he was there for a year. And then at that time, Howie Roseman, right after that, Howie became GM again, basically in Philadelphia, and called and said, I want Nick back. And we worked on a contract. It was Howie and I talked about this recently. It was them in Tampa Bay. And we finished the contract at the Athletes First Classic. And Howie was at a wedding, and the two of us left our respective events to go work out the details. But he went back, and then obviously he's now the king of Philadelphia. He'll never have to pay for a meal there or anything like that.
Right. And so,
much to my chagrin as a Patriots fan, but
yeah. So he wins Super Bowl MVP.
Yep.
He's got 2 years left on his contract at the time as basically a backup level contract, right? But he's a Super Bowl MVP. So you want to adjust it and do something to reward him for what he had just done. And you come up with this creative concept of a contract. I find it extremely interesting. So if you want to just touch on that.
Yeah, I don't remember if he had 1 or 2 years left, but it was, how do we get him paid more retroactively to what he did, not for what he's going to do? And that was kind of the big struggle, because at that time, I don't think anybody had really done that. Like, get something for absolutely nothing, right? I think we've seen it now recently.
Sure.
But back then, 8 years ago or whatever it was like, no, like, there's a contract. He has incentives. He got paid for the incentives. But it was like, okay, but he did something so extreme. So what we ended up with an agreement was, I believe we definitely added some incentives to the next year that would, reward him if he did even more. But then we got him an extra $2 million of cash. And then we added some language to it whereby the team could pick up an option for an extra year, but then Nick had the ability to buy back that year by returning the $2 million, which would then put the team in the position of, do you let him go and be a unrestricted free agent, or do you franchise tag him? So the team ultimately had the final trump card or the final decision, but we did this. If Nick hadn't played that year as well, because Carson Wentz had gotten hurt, he would have gotten $2 million and everybody would have gone their separate ways. But because Nick actually took them, I think it was to the division championship again, all these dominoes went into effect. So at the end of the day, what ended up happening was the team picked up the option. They gave Nick $2 million more. Nick bought back his freedom, and then the team had to make a decision. Do they let him hit the open market, or do they franchise tag him? I think the franchise tag was maybe $30 million or something like that. They opted not to franchise tag him, and he went to Jacksonville, where we signed I think he had $50 million guaranteed or something like that, $44 or $50 million. So he ended up having to pay back the $2 million, but he bought his freedom, which was ended up being much more lucrative.
Right. And so it's so unique in the NFL because, like you said, I don't think there's another one that has been done like this, at least not under modern CBAs. But it's something that happens a lot of times in NBA and MLB where you see players buying their right to free agency or opting out of the contract. This is essentially an opt-out, but he had to write a check and send back to Jeffrey Lurie, here's my $2 million that you had given me. You can have it back.
Yeah, it's really funny. A couple things. I think you're right. Like, I don't think you see opt-outs in baseball, right? Especially in baseball or player options, basketball too. But even in baseball, a player can opt out and cut certain, I think Soto's deal has an opt-out that just got done. But yeah, in football it was very rare. And I remember helping Nick write the letter to Jeffrey, or I think it was Jeffrey and Howie at the time. But it was something different, and it was because, again, we were asking for free money. And again, I don't want to call it free. He had won the Super Bowl for them. But we were asking for something, and this was their quid pro quo. So, yes, he ended up writing the check for $2 million, which, by the way, stung. Don't get me wrong. But then to be able to, it was a good investment, right? To buy your freedom, and be able to go sign a free agent. Because, again, how many quarterbacks have free agency and sign, good starter type deals? It was kind of the happy medium.
Right.
I'll give you $2 million right now if you give me $50 million guaranteed.
Right. That's a good investment. Yeah. Did the final deal then come with the statue that they ended up putting outside the stadium?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of, so Nick retired officially earlier this year and went back to Lincoln Financial for the first time for a game since he left the team. And as we were leaving the stadium, he's like, I want my kids to see the statue. So we had an escort with us and literally had to go halfway around the stadium just so Nick could show his kids the statue, which is still there. Yeah. Pretty crazy because the coach isn't there, the player isn't there. But you don't realize how much a franchise cares until they win something that they have never really won before.
Right. Well, they still have the Super Bowl trophy, and I bet a lot of fans, when they saw him walking through, were yelling Philly, Philly at him.
Going crazy. I mean, the stuff that we've seen and we've heard and tattoos of him and things like that. I mean, you literally are talking about a guy who was traded away, and kudos to Howie Roseman. He was Howie's guy, and Howie found a way to, and, even later in his career, Howie and I talked about ways to get Nick back, and it was close, actually, right before he retired, a couple of years before he retired, of going back to Philadelphia. But yeah, it's funny. I don't get it as much. And this goes to something you've always said, Murph, is like, we don't enjoy our victories enough. Right? Like, he was Super Bowl MVP. There's 55 of those guys. And actually, Brady probably has like 3 of them. So there's really 50 of those guys. I mean, what Nick did was incredible and one of the most unique situations that there was.
Yep. I think it's that contract, as AJ said, that contract's never been replicated. That run, I don't know if I don't know if there's been another backup quarterback who did that, right? But it didn't do that in that city is unheard of. So, well, you have a lot of other contracts we're going to talk about in the next episode, Fred Warner. And as we wrap up this episode, like we kind of like to wrap up every episode with like lessons learned, and from this. And for me, for this podcast, the one lesson I learned, which I think is applicable to all industries, not just sports agency, is like, if you want to build a company, from the ground up, which is what we did, you want to build a company that's going to become the best in the industry, which is what we did, you have to find people like Justin. And by that, I don't mean pessimistic, but I mean people who are incredibly intelligent and willing to roll up their sleeves and do whatever it takes to get the job done and put their ego aside. And that is very unusual in our industry, particularly the ego part, right? But over the 23 years Justin and I have worked together, I can't tell you how valuable his intelligence has been, And again, we don't have an industry like that's run on intelligence, right? And so, like, having that intelligence and being able to take that intelligence and say, hey, let's go start our own Athletes First Academy. Let's go start our own classic charity event, and then do the net present value and all the calculations. And so, he's obviously gets along very well, great personality, great family man, great values, but that intelligence and being willing to roll up your sleeve and do whatever it takes to be the best. Anyone out there is looking to start a company, go find yourself a Justin, because you're not going to be able to do it without that type of person.
I appreciate that.
I think my takeaway kind of piggybacks off that is Justin's willingness and ability to just be that jack of all trades, where He is just looking around the office like, what else needs to be done? I'm going to just do it. I'm not going to wait for the person who has that responsibility to get it done, whether it's, going to the airport and picking up clients or anything else that you do around the office, even to the point of you're on a family vacation, but you're in the business center working because that's just, you love what you do so much. So I think that speaks volumes of you.
I appreciate it. I think it goes back to kind of that advice my dad gave me all those years ago, right? Find a place where you love what you do and it's not work. I mean, yes, don't get me wrong, we're always on call and those sort of things, but I'd rather be working on budgets for our contract values than widgets, and actually
Hate widgets.
I'd prefer not doing any of those anymore. But no, it's I appreciate you, Murph, for responding to that email and putting me in that room for 6 hours with no food, no water. But listen, we're fortunate where we work, and I think it's hard because sometimes I think, I try to remind our employees, don't take this for granted. Like
Yep.
it's not the same. I remember real quick. I remember when I went and spoke at UCLA, and as I finished, I texted. You probably won't remember this, but I got home and I emailed the office just to say, "Hey guys, like take a step back and realize how lucky we are to do what we do, and how many people want this job." Without knowing the headaches that come of it, but like appreciate it and love what you do and give back to this company. So it's been awesome. Look forward to more.
I think that's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, which is, beyond all of our comfort zone, but like we want to be able to share the athlete's story with all people out there who want to listen and share our lessons and tell them, like, listen, what we've done, you can do. You know what I mean? It's, we're in a great place. And I think talking about it and going down this history it makes me appreciate it even more. So
Absolutely. And we're just fortunate. Like the guys we work with, the Nick Foles of the world, the Fred Warrens of the world, Mark Andrews of the world, Justin, these are great people.
oh, unbelievable.
Great people. We're really fortunate to work with them, and it makes it even better.
Yeah. Well, Justin, we thank you for coming on this episode. Hope everyone joins us for the next episode where we get into Justin Schulman's negotiation of Justin Herbert's record-breaking deal for the Chargers. Another phenomenal story, very unique, and we look forward to having you back.
Sounds good, guys.